Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast. Today we'll be discussing open access books. To help us with this, we're joined by Professor Richard Brook, who's based in our School of Architecture. Richard has recently published his latest book, which is called The Renewal of Post-War Manchester, Planning, Architecture and the State. Richard, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot. It's really nice to be here.
Just to get us going, please can you tell us a bit about yourself and your work and a bit about the School of Architecture as well?
Sure. So I'm a Professor of Architecture, leading the research for the department, and I've been here for about 2 years. We're a really young School of Architecture, established 4.5 years ago, and we've recently achieved full accreditation from our two governing bodies, the RRBA and the ARB. So we're quite buoyant at the moment and recruiting really well, which is lovely. Before I came to Lancaster, I was at Manchester School of Architecture for 15 years, where I pretty much did every job that's possible in that school. And so Lancaster, being young, really presented a kind of fantastic set of new challenges and enabled me to bring all of the sort of knowledge and experience that I had in Manchester to bear on this new project. And I think, it's really exciting that we've got a very strong kind of environmental bias and focus on the course. And, Lancaster University itself is amidst these sort of wonderful landscapes of like Morecambe Bay and the Lake District and the Trough of Bowland. And I'm interested generally in, I suppose, architecture, not just the built object, but the built object as part of this wider landscape. So I guess that's kind of the way that I think about architecture, and it's certainly the way that I've approached architecture in the book. And you'll note in the title that the word architecture comes after the word planning. And really that's to do with the period of the book. So it concerns post-war Manchester. So nominally 3 decades between 1945 and 1975, with some longer histories either side of that, depending on the chapter. But in that particular period, most qualified planners were also architects or had done an undergraduate degree, at least in architecture, before converting to planning. So you had this very, very strong sense amongst planners of design as a discipline, whereas after 1970, economic planning and regional planning became much more foregrounded in the planning profession. So in the period that I'm looking at, we have this really amazing connection between the way that Whitehall announces policy for the built environment, the way that that policy is then interpreted by local authority planner architects, who often made these wonderful 3-dimensional models that would be suggestive to the developers and architects to come about the sorts of massing and things they wanted. And then obviously architects themselves had their own interpretation of that. So what's really interesting to me anyway, and hopefully the reader, is that you can track these parliamentary decisions or conversations in Hansard, through Hansard in the Houses of Parliament, through to policy papers, through to local government action, and then all the way through to kind of materials in the built environment, and being able to track that and show those kind of rich relationships between political decisions and door handles, for example, is really exciting.
So the book has been published open access, so it's freely available for anyone with an internet connection to read. Can you please tell me what inspired you to publish your book open access?
Several things, really. I think the idea of open access has been around for a while, and obviously most journal articles that are produced are in some way open access, even if it's the pre-publication version that you're uploading to the institutional repository. And I think that it clearly, gives your work a wider audience. So that's the first thing, that as many people as possible can read it, and all across the world. My publisher is an academic publisher in the UK who does have a global reach, but nonetheless, for anybody anywhere to be able to get a hold of it is really valuable, particularly when there's a subject of a book, but also there's a lot of ideas in a book that you hope are transposable and that other scholars will pick up and use. And quite often, I've presented things at conferences that have never gone anywhere. And I've had people come to me, afterwards, have you published anything from that? And this book actually crystallizes quite a lot of thinking, probably for 2 decades or more, really. So to be able to have all of those ideas in that book and for everyone to be able to access it is really, really wonderful, really. And I have friends who aren't architects, who aren't academics, who wouldn't normally have access to those sorts of materials. And so I think, full on, public accessibility can only be a good thing. Our work needs to reach people. There's no point just keeping it within the academy.
Yeah.
It needs to be meaningful. And so, you can do things for dissemination. I did a talk in Manchester last Thursday night, but that's to 60 people, and this potentially reaches, I don't know, 60 million.
Yeah. Can you walk us through the process of publishing the book, Open Access, then? Did it differ at all from your experiences of publishing non-open access?
The publishing process for this book, this is only my second book with an academic publisher.
Okay.
So other things I've made in the past are, I do a lot of photography and field work. So I've published sort of guidebooks that have writing and photography. And obviously that's a situation where I sit with a designer side by side and almost work through the book with the designer. And so with Manchester University Press, that was a very different experience. And one of the issues we faced was that I wanted the print title to be relatively inexpensive. Academic titles can be prohibitively expensive sometimes because they count on university libraries buying copies at £80 or £90.
Yeah.
And the publisher was with me on that. They wanted to market this as somewhere between general interest and academic, because it's about a city and lots of people are interested in cities, not just scholars of cities. So the idea of making it, accessible in terms of the price point for the hard copy presented us with some issues, insofar as I am a designer of sorts, and I wanted a particular finish to the product, as it were. Because the book is about that period, 45 to 75, I actually wanted something that felt really classic.
Yeah.
So I wanted something that was hard bound, that was cloth backed, that had foil block on the spine, that had a dust jacket, that had 175 full colour illustrations.
Yeah.
Had some nice unfinished stock for the paper, had inner sleeves, and so all of these things cost money. And the publisher and I wouldn't say we were at loggerheads, but we had some very, very long discussions about how feasible the things I wanted were within the price point that I also wanted the book to go out at. And so it came to bear that there was an option that if we could achieve the funding for the open access version, then that released some of their capital to be able to spend more money on the print production to make the book exactly as I wanted, almost exactly as I wanted. And so that came quite late in the process. And I think the program here, to support authors in that, was really, really meaningful and meant a lot in terms of being able to achieve that thing. In terms of the difference between publishing this and non-open access, they were minimal, to be fair. The biggest sort of difference in labour for me was writing the descriptive captions for the images. Because, of course, one of the other wonderful things about open access is that, like many ebooks, if somebody without sight wishes to read the book, they also get a text description of the images that they're looking at. And that was quite a learning curve, actually, because it's not like writing a caption for an image. It's writing the description of the thing that you're looking at. So that was really interesting for me. And it took me a few goes to get to those descriptions, to make them, useful and kind of accurate. And then when you read them in parallel with the captions, hopefully those people who are reading the book without sight still get a good sense of what the image is. And it's important. That's really important to me because a lot of my work of research is visually led.
Yeah.
So frequently I will assemble plans and diagrams and maps almost kind of chronologically, and then start to interrogate the sequence of the decision making in between those plans. You see.
Yeah.
So again, open in the truest sense and accessible in the truest sense. And I'm yet to get any feedback from users in that respect, but hopefully I've done a decent job.
What impact will publishing the book open access have on potential audiences? I know you touched on this previously, but do you envision that your research might reach an audience that you haven't considered before?
That's always possible. You can never anticipate what will happen to a work when you put it out
Yeah.
into the world in the public domain, especially. Um, so, like I said, I kind of really hope that certainly scholars who are looking at the same period as I pick it up, and I'm hoping to do a bit of a lecture tour around cities that have a sort of similar history
Yeah.
later on in the year. And so I would anticipate and hope that certainly scholars who are interested in that period and those cities pick up the book and realise it's not, Manchester is a case study to explore
Yeah.
the various approaches that I've had. But equally, the publisher was absolutely convinced that, this will reach, obviously at the moment, the English-speaking world, but in ways that the print publication would never do. And they're committed and certain that will happen. I mean, I guess what would be really good is if some of the ideas were picked up by scholars who are not interested in my period, but could use some of the methodology to sort of apply to their own research.
And finally, do you have any advice for other authors or academics who are considering publishing their work open access?
I'd say go for it. There's something quite rewarding. I've got friends who are long-term unemployed or who have caring responsibilities. They don't have income, even at a price point that we've achieved.
Yeah.
And even with a discount code that I can send them, it's still, they don't have that sort of spare cash. And so I know that some friends of mine have already kind of encountered the work who wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
And that's instantly, gratifying and rewarding. But also I think the process, most publishers now who subscribe to this model have their processes in good shape, and it's quite easy. There's not, certainly from my perspective, not a great deal of extra work required.
Yeah.
And so from the perspective where I got the object that I wanted, and at the same time that's reaching hundreds of thousands more people, then I can't see why you would not choose to do it.
Oh, thank you very much for joining us today. Just before we go, it'd be great if you could tell us where could we find the book and where is it available?
Well, hopefully get some copies in this library, but I'm good at ordering other people's books. I haven't done it with mine yet. You can buy copies from Lancaster University Press, the publisher, but it's available from all the regular book sources one might anticipate.
Yeah.
So the RIBA library have a copy, and I've seen copies for sale in Australia and Italy and other places already online. So yeah, if you search the title "Renewal of Post-War Manchester," I don't think anything else comes up on Google.
Oh, Richard, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tom.